And we are in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And let's see if I can figure out what chapter we're on here without losing my page. Nope. I'm using a different program and now I can't figure it out. Anyway, last week, he was talking about the incarnation. If you remember, that was the last thing we talked about. And getting the idea of the incarnation really belongs squarely in the path of bhakti yoga, the path of devotion, and it's quite lovely because in the overarching idea of the divine, of God within the Vedanta. God really has two aspects. There's the absolute unchanging, as you know, where God is really the noun of love and wisdom and being, and then God is with action, with vibration, the power of God, and we often call that Shakti, or the female aspect of God, and that's God manifest. And so, for people with a Christian background, John talks about that in his first chapter. He says, "In the beginning was the Word." And then he says a very odd thing. He says, "The Word was with God, and the Word was God." And so, Word, the Vedantist takes that idea just one step farther, and Word is Om. They actually name the word. And Om is the vibration, it's the sound, and really one of the reasons they use that word is because it has all of the sounds made in it. It starts guttural, it goes palatal, and then it ends labial. Right, so it starts in the throat, uses the top of the mouth, and then ends at the lips, and so that's all possible sounds that the mouth can make. So that's the name of God, and that is what we see, that we live in a world of the manifestation of the divine. And then an incarnation is that divinity, that God, stepping down one step into actual material manifestation, a slight bit of ignorance, meaning that he identifies himself with the body mind, which we call ignorance. So, and just by holding on to that, he's able to manifest, or she's able to manifest. And for the bhakti yogi, for the person who's practicing this path of devotion, it gives you the ability to hold on to God when actually God is something you can't hold on to, because God is everywhere present and beyond. You can't give God a hug if he doesn't take a form. You can't see him as mother, father, child, lover, or friend if he doesn't take a form. And so, as an act of love for his devotees, he manifests as their highest ideal of love. And according to the Gita, he does this anytime that the world gets too out of balance, where adharma, or wrong living, or wrong thinking, ignorance, becomes dominant. And when ignorance becomes dominant, then he reincarnates again and gives his message appropriate to that time and space to help restore that balance. So we were talking about that last week, that really, to be careful when we look at an incarnation, when we look at a Jesus or a Buddha or a Rama or a Krishna, not to identify that body mind as God, that somehow contains God, that somehow God has squeezed himself into that and manifest, because you can't squeeze infinity into a form. And so the proper way to see the incarnation is as an absence, as a whole, right? Ramakrishna, when he was asked, "Who are you?" he says, "I am a whole through which God can be seen." So it's like we've got this wall of Maya, the wall of the material world, and an incarnation is a hole in that wall that you can look through to see the infinite God beyond. And so all of these incarnations are not to be placed within time and history and culture, that they are described by an absence of egoism, that there is nothing blocking the infinite nature of God that can be seen through them. And that will help us understand why all of these incarnations are the same manifestation of the beloved. They're not the same person who keeps coming back, because God is not that person as such. Persons are made of egos that have multiple attributes of ignorance, and the pure soul, the incarnation, is a lack of that egoism, as much of a lack of egoism as is possible, because there has to be a touch of egoism in order to manifest a body. You have to have some identity with the body mind as yourself in order for it to show. And so that's how we see the incarnation, and that's how we know that this incarnation is one, regardless of how many times he shows. That same hole opens again and again to help us come back to center, to help us come find our balance inside. And so that's why looking at God, or falling in love with an incarnation, ultimately leads you to unity in love with the beloved. And that is the path of Bhakti Yoga, actually. So the master tonight is talking to Bhagavan Das, and Bhagavan Das is a member of the Brahmo Samaj, which was headquartered there in Calcutta. And it was kind of an attempt to reform traditional Hinduism into a more modern form. So they believed they did a lot of the same kind of practices that a church would do, and held a lot of the same ideas in such. And so, but we're not worshipers necessarily of the Christ. They were well, I don't really know a whole lot. I don't want to go wrong. So it's not important, but the master's talking to him. They were somewhat exclusive, and he says to them, to Bhagavan, the eternal religion, the religion of the rishis, has been in existence from time out of mind and will exist eternally. There exist in this Sanatana Dharma all forms of worship, worship of God with form and worship of the impersonal deity, or God without form, as well. It contains all paths, the path of knowledge, the path of devotion, and so on. Other forms of religion, the modern cults, will remain for a few days and then disappear. So this has become a very attractive ideal that I'm hoping to manifest. That's why we're doing this experiment in Colorado, where we're having a Vedanta center that doesn't manifest as any particular religion, a place where a Christian could come and become a better Christian, a Hindu could come and be a better Hindu, a Muslim could come and be a better Muslim, that we can all practice together with this understanding that we're all looking at the same gem, the Sanatana Dharma, this eternal religion, and that each of our traditions in the world, the traditions that have stood the test of time, are a facet on that gem. So the full gem can be appreciated and enjoyed through any of its facets, but no one facet is the whole gem. The divine is just too big, first of all, to fit in the mind. So no one could ever hold the whole gem or understand the whole gem. And but we have these facets, which are the world's traditions, usually founded by somebody who had that unitive experience, that oneness with God. And actually, you can't really call it an experience, because if there's one with God, there's no experiencer, and there's no separation. So that's why we don't know a whole lot about it, because it doesn't fit in time-space causation. God is outside time. He's eternal, or she's eternal, or that is eternal. And to put it in a sentence, that's why Ramakrishna says that Brahman, one of the words permitted to be used for God, just as a pointer, though, not a descriptor, that is, oh boy, what was I going to say about that? Brahman. Did I say Bhagavan? Brahman is the name of God. Boy, maybe we should just sing devotional songs tonight. So, yes, the Brahman is the only thing that has not been polluted by the tongue, meaning that it is the only thing that we can talk about that is beyond speech, beyond mind, that it really is just a pointer, and even you can't say that the name is a pointer to that because there's no form to point at and there's no one to point. You can think of Brahman as the dream substance. We've been talking about that for a while, and I verified this with Swami Sarvadevananda this week. It's like, can we say that, Brahman has become all of this? And so, in a sense, when I touch this chair next to me or I touch that wall behind me, in essence, I'm touching Brahman. But I can't do that without the understanding that I am also made of that same Brahman, and that the air between me and that wall, or the space between me and that wall, is also Brahman. It's just, it has appeared to us as separate and individual objects, but the reality of it is that it is one substance, just like a dream. Like if you were dreaming right now, nothing in your room is actually what it is, right? It's all made in your own mind. And what's it made of? The same stuff that thoughts are made of. It's made of mind stuff, as it were. But like my new idea is not my idea, but a growing understanding that was validated by Swami Sarvadevananda is that you can talk about it as being all Brahman. And so in a playful sense, you are seeing only God in everything. God isn't in a body, God is in fact that body. And that means everyone I'm looking at on the screen right now is actually a pixel. I get that, but at least a representation of a body somewhere in the world. And so to understand that, and that's actually a good example, that what you're seeing right now is just little pixels on your screen, and it's your mind that gives it a form and a name. It's your mind that looks at it and says, "Oh, that's Swami C," or, "That's Jen." When in fact that's not Jen, and that's not Swami C at all. It's a bunch of colored light, or like a movie. All of those things, we project a meaning, and that's what our ignorance does because we're ignorant of what we are. We don't know who we are, and without knowing what we are, we can't accurately know what anything else is. And since there really is nothing else, if you think about the nature of a dream, where everything is made of dream stuff, there is no separation. If you could see the dream stuff as dream stuff, there would just be a big block of solidity, right? Everything would be a part of that block. But because we don't see the mind stuff or the dream stuff as dream stuff, we see it as the objects in the dream, we're in ignorance. We are projecting what we think about ourselves, and that is that we're separate and apart from the whole. Since we think of ourselves that way, we project everything else as being separate and apart from the whole, right? And so it's because we don't know what we are or who we are that we perceive everything incorrectly, because we're projecting through our mind. We're identified with mind. We think our thoughts are our own. We think that our thoughts are about us and to the world, and we live in a world that that state of egoism draws a line of relationship to everything to me. It is ultimately utterly selfish, which is why we call it ignorance. We've separated ourselves, and then we look at a world and build a world where everything is related to us somehow. If it's not related to us, we just don't think about it. We're sad when our friend dies, but we're not even aware when someone who's not our friend dies, right? I mean, thousands of people died today in the world. We're not in mourning. But if one of our friends had died today, we'd be in mourning. And why is that? Because of me and mine. And that is our delusion, that we're separate and we only see the world through the lens of me and mine, and are only concerned with things that are related to ourselves in a sense. All right, so all of that. But this eternal religion, he's saying here, is eternal, and any religion, all religions that last, must contain the elements of the Sanatana Dharma, right? That if they don't, they may come for a while, but they're going to disappear. They won't have that staying power because they won't resonate at that deep level. They won't answer the question of who I am in a way that's been known by the sages, by the practitioners that have touched the grace of the divine, as it were. So Sri Ramakrishna it's March 23rd, 1884. And Sri Ramakrishna was sitting in his room after his midday meal with Rakal, Ram, and some other devotees. He was not quite well. The injured arm was still bandaged. But in spite of his illness, his room was a veritable mart of joy, and he the center of it. Devotees thronged there daily to see the master. Spiritual talk went on incessantly, and the very air of the room vibrated with bliss. Sometimes the master would sing the name and the glories of God, and sometimes he would go into samadhi. For him, for an advanced practitioner, that samadhi is a momentary union with the divine. Something would remind Thakur or Ramakrishna of God, and just thinking of God, he would go into a state where he would drop his identity with body mind for a minute, and the body would just go into a stasis, would stop moving. And we have that example when there was a doctor in the room when he went into that samadhi one time, and the doctor was very curious. He had never seen that before because it's a very, very, very rare state. And so the doctor went up and touched the whites of the master's eyes, of Ramakrishna's eyes, and the body, of course, did not flinch or anything because at that moment, in that state of samadhi, the self is aware of all things and not particularized in a body, not identified with a body. In that state, he is every body, he's every atom, he is the dream stuff in a sense like that. All right. So he's in there. And when he's in that state and when he's at spiritual, the whole room has that energy of knowledge, that energy of Satchitananda, the nature of the self, is manifested. And, the air, the room becomes charged with that, what we would call the sacred or the holy. And everybody feels that because it is our nature within us. It is actually that one which has become all of us. And so when someone is aware of that and someone goes into this samadhi, the way what my teacher, well, what Swami Prabhupada used to say, he used to say that you can always know if a man is truly spiritual or a woman, because in their presence, you will think of God. That will be your natural thought if you're in their presence, to think about the beloved, the divine. So he was in samadhi, going in and out of samadhi. So going up and down the levels of consciousness, bringing his level of awareness down to the body mind, and then he could teach in that room. Sometimes it would go up a little bit and he would just be in bliss, kind of frozen, just smiling or laughing or talking to the Divine Mother, actually seeing the Divine Mother present. And then he would go up even higher than that and actually remove his actual identity of body mind and be in that state of samadhi. We would still see a body mind because we think of him as a body mind. We would still project him, but he, as that which is him or her, is not body mind. And so he is returning to the natural state, our natural state, unbounded and ever free, aware of the dream stuff, being Brahman, and the self being identified with everything at once. So he knows that there is nothing different. It's beyond, like the lowest samadhi would be like being in a dream and knowing that you're dreaming. You know that everything that you look at is you, but you still have that sense of separateness. But that state of samadhi is deep sleep. There's no dream at all. There's no receptor. There's no separation. There's just an isness, a being. And consciousness comes closer to awareness, right? Awareness has no objects in it. Consciousness is awareness with objects in it. So when we become aware of something other than self, or think that there's something other, then we're conscious. When we're in samadhi, or when we find that union with the divine, as it were, it's very, very unsettling to talk about these things at that level because there are not any proper words for it. And so anytime we talk about God in particular, you have to kind of know that everything we could say is simply pointing at something just beyond the words. It's just to help us get a handle on things. If we really want to talk about God in the personal way, then we talk about a Jesus or a Buddha or a Ramakrishna that way. So sometimes the
So,
master,
excuse me, Swamiji.
yes, sir. Yes, Ma. Gita?
So, when they in Samadhi, when Ramakrishna, Lord Ramakrishna went into Samadhi, so that's and they go to another realm totally.
No,
What
no, 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 no. No, when they're in Samadhi, there is no other realm in reality. Another realm is like another room. It only exists when we have a sense of a particular self. At that point, he's every room. He's the house. He's the yard. He's the country it's in. He's the world it's sitting on. He's the galaxy that world exists in. He knows that all of that is within him at that moment, that he is not in that. It's like when you understand in a dream that you're not in the dream, you're the body sleeping in the bed. Just as a rough example, when anybody or anyone goes into samadhi, you go into what the dreamer, the sleeping body is actually. Yeah, there's no way we're going to be able to describe
I
what.
do, but Swamiji, but if Thakur goes into Samadhi and
Uh-huh.
his disciple goes into or another human being goes into a Samadhi, there'll be
Yeah.
two this difference because Thakur Samadhi
No,
will be or they'll be one.
they would be one. If you they don't have a perspective, because a perspective takes a point of reference, and when you're in samadhi, there's not a point of reference because you're all points, right? We would see two because we would not be in samadhi, and we identify both of those people who went into samadhi as body minds because we're attached to our body mind, and so that causes us to interpret the world that we see in a particular way, right? We don't know that we're dreaming. We don't know, we're not aware that everything is of the same isness, but they they are aware, and they have actually become everything. They have become you as well. So if in that state they did want to, they could draw themselves into you and be you. They wouldn't be watching you or separate from you because you actually are that at this moment. But you perceive yourself from the outside in, right? And as long as we perceive ourselves from the outside in, when we describe ourselves from the outside, that's in ignorance, right? And we call ourselves men and women, and we give ourselves nationalities and hair colors and weights and ages and all of those things. And that's who we think we are, right? We think we're describing ourselves. And of course, with a little bit of discernment, we see that's ridiculous because when you were two, you would have described yourself with a goatee and you know crow's feet around your eyes. you know, you would have babbled. Actually,
But
uh,
Swamiji, there's no difference like Thakur's Samadhi and somebody else's Samadhi. So did his disciples also go into Samadhi because Thakur had to be brought down, right? What
uh,
about his disciples?
well, Thakur, according to Ramakrishna, and Thakur is another name for Ramakrishna for folks that don't know. Ramakrishna says that a normal person, if there's such a thing, the average person, you and me, let's say, that we don't have the highest. We it's very unlikely that we'll reach the highest non-experience of nirvikalpa samadhi. So there's levels of samadhi, right? Just like in the dream, at what we call normal level of consciousness, the dream seems absolutely real. Like we're sitting here in a room and everything's going on. And then there's another level, a little bit above that, where your consciousness is raised somewhat, and you're actually seeing the dream stuff in everything, and you know that you are dreaming, right? So that it's not really real, but you're still partly in it. You can still function and see the separations and experience it, but you can't be convinced that they're real because you have a seeing or an understanding, an experience of it as a sameness, but you're maintaining just enough sense of self to have an experience. And then that Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the highest state. And he says when a normal person goes into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the body drops off, the body dies, because the body has fulfilled its purpose. It's not necessary anymore. But an incarnation can go into samadhi and come back down again. He says that, it's like a normal person can go into see the king, but doesn't have any access to the upper chambers. But the prince can go up and down, in and out of the king's chambers, into the courts, out to the yard, off into the fields. But a normal person only has access to the highest place, which means the throne room. He can't go beyond that. So he says that. And most of us, he says, most of us at the time that the body drops off, if we have an awareness of ourself as separate from body mind, that will understand that event. And at that point, some people, if they choose at that moment, can have that ultimate realization that you are love itself, you are wisdom itself, you are existence itself, and you are nothing. But there is nothing that isn't you. That it's that Satchitananda, that combination of love, wisdom, and being, that has manifested all of this.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah. But if we could all go into Nirvikalpa Samadhi, it would be the same. We would be the same being. We are not actually separate beings, right? Just like in a dream, everybody that's in that dream is the dreamer. There is no separate people in there. They're all just walking around, but you believe they're separate. Anyway, I can beat that horse anymore. So all of that is just really, really nonsense. Keep that in mind. There's nothing we can actually say about that level of truth because it's non-sensual. It's not of mind. It's not within time-space causation. It has no past, present, or future, and it has no subject, object, verb. It is a singularity, and a singularity cannot be thought of. The mind cannot conceive of anything that does not have that triad of triads. Right? Your mind to think of something has to be subject object, and there's usually a verb in there. That verb can be stillness, though. It has to have a past, present, and a future because that's how we operate. We believe in a past, even though there's none such thing. We experience a present, but we can't put our finger on it. And we project a future, which also does not exist. And so everything that we experience, we place within that framework. And then time-space causation. We think that things cause things because we always put up boundaries. But if you don't have a boundary, you come to understand immediately that every cause is also an effect. And so the idea of a separate cause and a separate effect is ignorance. That's why we call it ignorance. It can't be that way. We should be able to know that it can't be that way. But the mind can only process things within those boundaries that have that triad in there. And at the end of the day, who cares? But there it is. That's how it is.
Complicated, very complicated.
Yeah, seemingly. But it comes apart. That's why this idea of discernment, don't let your mind get away with anything. And that doesn't mean just watch your thoughts. That means become aware of thoughts there and then begin to watch mind. Watch how it works. Watch where your desires come from. The desires are born of expectation coming from a memory, right? And you start seeing that. You don't see it at first, right? We don't see it at first because at first we're just trying to figure out what's in here. I don't see anything but red. If it's dark in the room, I don't see anything but dark brown or black. And we don't know because we're still looking out through the senses. But with the practice of meditation, we begin to understand that the senses are separate from us. And we begin to realize that we watch our thoughts. And so we begin to see that the thoughts are separate from us. And body is separate from us. It has to report to us to tell us how it feels. So we become aware of a different level of interior world. We start to see body, mind, and we don't see the watcher, but we become aware of being watcher, right? And then when we've separated from body-mind, we can study body-mind as the watcher. We can observe it, and we can see the nature of how body works. We can see the nature of the relationship between body-mind, and we begin to realize that body is actually mind. Mind projects the body, right? And it just keeps going until you are in a state of infinity within. And when you start to see that infinity, then you can't help but begin laughing. You're full of a bliss and full of a wonder and full of the isness that is this manifestation of a love that's infinite, a love that has no conditions. You begin to understand that all knowledge is available spontaneously in the moment, that you cannot fail. And you begin to know that this existence is outside of time, that it is not within time. So it has no beginning and has no end. It's simply an eternal isness, as it were. No words for us to go there with, though. All right. So yes. But from our perspective, it's complicated. All right. So here he says, let's just read that again. The spiritual talk went on incessantly, right? Because that was the reality. That's what everybody wanted to know about. How is this guy shining with bliss? When you looked at Ramakrishna, just, all the direct disciples said over and over again to people who asked about the experience of being with the master, they would just simply say, you cannot imagine the amount of love that this person, this man, this divine self had for you and for everyone that was near him. He says, you could not imagine being loved that deeply and that purely and that honestly. So all these people are sitting around him and they're seeing that beaming joy, that bliss of being. They're feeling that real rapport and that connection with him because he knows that he is them. And anyway, we don't have to get back into that again. The room, the very air of the room vibrated with bliss, right? Because that was his nature. Satchit Ananda. The Ananda is that bliss, that love. That when you feel, when you're with someone who is loving you as much as you've ever been loved, there's a wonderful feeling in that love, that wonderful feeling. For me, I think of when I went off to college and I had been away from my family for the first time in my life for 3 months. My parents came and gave a surprise visit, and I was coming in the dorm from class, and my mother came in the entrance at the far end of that hall, and I saw her. And even now, it brings tears to remember the joy that I felt, the happiness, my mom. And I remember I just dropped my books, I dropped my backpack, and I just tore down that hallway. And I just remember that hug, of someone I love so dearly and someone who loved me so dearly. And the smell of her hair, the feel of her arms, everything was so familiar, to me. That's bliss. And that's just a touch of what it was to be in the presence of Sri Ramakrishna or the presence of a Jesus or the presence of a Buddha. That compassion was just overwhelming, and you couldn't, like he says here, the room vibrated with this. Sometimes the master would sing the names and glories of God. You ever hear a person sing from their soul, sing from their heart? All of our great singers, the very best of them, give us just a taste of that, just a taste of where his words would come from, directly from the soul, directly from the self. So he would sing the names and the glories of God, and sometimes he would go into samadhi, which means everything would stop as his awareness encompassed literally the universe at that moment. The devotees being amazed at the ease with which the master freed himself from the consciousness of the body, how he was able to let go of me and mine so effortlessly. Ram, there is talk of Narendra's marrying Mr. R. Mitra's daughter. Narendra has been offered a large dowry. The master smiling. Yes, Narendra may thus become a leader of society or something like that. He will be an outstanding man, whatever career he follows. Right? The The master did not much encourage the conversation about Narendra. Narendra eventually became Swami Vivekananda, renounced the world. He didn't marry this person and didn't limit himself to just being a great man in the world, but he became a great manifestation, a great soul, someone who we study and, learn from. The master to Ram. Well, can you tell me why I become so impatient when I'm ill? Sometimes I ask this man and sometimes that man how I may be cured. You see, one must either believe everyone or no one at all. Right? It's like you have to, if you're going to see people separate and apart and you're going to believe you're sick and all of that, then you're going to have to believe someone. You're going to have to take some reality from them. But if you're not going to do that, if you're going to see God in everyone, then no one particular at all is real to you. It's the essence alone that is real, that is manifesting the same essence in everyone. But one cannot have faith in them if one thinks of them as mere men, right? If you don't see that divinity in them, you can't believe they're real. From his perspective, you have to understand, he's a knower, and he can't be fooled by the curtain, right? It's like sitting in the and watching the movie and not forgetting for the whole movie that you're watching colors flashing on a screen, right? If you can't forget that you're watching colors flashing on a screen, a white screen, if you can't forget that, the movie's never going to collapse into meaning, right? You're not going to see, your mind is not going to create people out of the colors. It's not going to associate the colors with the soundtrack. It's not going to believe a story is happening. It's going to see it as it is, right? That there is nothing there. It's just a display of light from the projector reflected back. And that's ultimately what we're seeing right now, is ourselves reflected on mind, right? Ourself. But in that reflection, we think we're a particular. We don't understand that the reflection in its entirety is us, right? And happening within us. Shambhu was fearfully delirious. Dr. Sarvadikari said that the delirium was due to the strong medicine. Haladhari asked the doctor to feel his pulse. The doctor said, "Let me see your eyes." "Oh, it is an enlargement of the spleen," the doctor says. Haladhari said that he had nothing of the sort, but Dr. Madhu gives good medicine, right? So he's just giving an example of, if you're going to go to a doctor, you have to believe the doctor. If you don't believe the doctor, why go to the doctor? And in this case, Haladhari said that he doesn't have anything of the sort. He doesn't believe the doctor, but he gives good medicine, right? The medicine is helpful, but the doctor's worthless. So, Ram, the medicine by itself does no good, though it greatly helps nature. Master, if that is so, why does opium cause constipation? Ram referred to Keshav Sen's death. Ram, you were quite right. You said that a gardener uncovers the roots of a good rose plant so that it may absorb the dew and grow stronger and healthier. The words of a holy man have been fulfilled. Master, I don't know about that. I wasn't calculating when I said it. It is you who say that, right? Very interesting idea. Communication. Oh, we could talk about that, I guess. But communication is, I just give you sounds. I can't really give you the contents of my mind, right? I just give you sounds. And you take those sounds and you project the contents of your own mind on those sounds. I could say, I see a red rose on the surface of Lake Wanaka. Well, if you've been to, Lafayette, you've walked around Lake Wanaka, then you would have the same picture of Lake Wanaka, but it would be your picture of Lake Wanaka from where you stood, you experienced it, and you would project that on those words. And you would project your last vision of a rose or your favorite vision of a rose. And so in general, we would be able to communicate. But it may not at all be what I meant. It may not at all have been what I was talking about. I could have been using it as a metaphor. Or if you hadn't been to Lake Wanaka, and you hadn't seen a rose, whatever you would project would be your own. But we would both call it a rose and we would call it Lake Wanaka, even though they had nothing in common. And so these words that we're forced to use are very, very inadequate, very clunky at best, right? Very clunky at best. And we don't know that until you've had an experience where you've heard something directly from one of these holy people. Because in a vision or in an inspired teaching, what they composed that sound out of, everything that was trying to be communicated comes with the word. And you don't have to interpret the word. It doesn't come in through the ears and through the senses. That kind of communication comes in through the back door, as it were. It's a knowing. It arrives in your mind as a knowing, not as a sound or an interpretation of a sound. There's no use in talking about that, really. But that's what he's pointing to. I don't know about that. I wasn't calculating when I said it. I wasn't taking my mind and creating an idea in there. It's only what you say. Ram says, the Brahmos have published something about you in their magazine. Master, published about me? Why? Why should they write now? I eat and I drink and I make merry. I don't know anything else. I once asked Keshav, why have you written about me? He said that it would bring people here. But man cannot teach by his own power. One cannot conquer ignorance without the power of God. At one time, two men were engaged to wrestle. One of them was Hanuman Singh, and the other was a Mussulman from Punjab. The Mussulman was a strong man, stout man. He had eaten lustily of butter and meat for 15 days before the day of the wrestling match, and even on that day, all thought that he would be the victor. Hanuman Singh, on the other hand, clad only in a dirty cloth, had eaten sparingly for some days before the day of the match and devoted himself to repeating the holy name of Mahavir. On the day of the match, he observed a complete fast. All thought that he was surely going to be defeated, but it was he who won, while the man who had feasted for 15 days lost the fight. Right? This is an interesting idea of what he's saying here. I saw a movie one time where the man made the point, he was a teacher teaching history, and he said, why, when America went to war with Vietnam, Vietnam's this tiny little country, very small army, and everybody thought, oh, for sure, the United States would just walk in there and conquer it, right? But it was the United States that went there. And what happened is that Vietnam forced us to go to war with them on their terms, right? And they won that war. You look at Russia and Ukraine, it seems like the same sort of thing is going on there. It's like Ukraine is responding and then forcing Russia to fight on their terms, right? They went in and took that northern territory there and forced Russia to respond to that. And in their response to that, then they attacked down south where the Russians had incurred. And so it's all this game. It's not just a matter of strength. It's not the obvious thing that is actually in control in this world. Right? And so what he's saying here is that the way that we interpret events in our lives, the way that we interpret meaning in our lives, is going to be based fully upon what we think of ourselves and how we and what we observe. Right? I think of that when the Twin Towers in New York City were bombed back in 9/11, right? And I was in the monastery at that time, and I watched that. I was, of course, horrified, right? I thought, oh my God, look at those horrible people, what they've done. That's terrible. And then that night on the news, I saw them in downtown Baghdad, that people were dancing in the street over that. And I sat there, it made me think, I thought, well, how could they be dancing in the street and I'm sitting here in horror over this happening? And I realized that it was because of what I thought I was. I was identifying myself as an American, as a man, and I was seeing the condition of the world from my perspective, knowing almost nothing about Iraq having no idea of that place. And so I went through an exercise of trying to put my mind into a young man in Iraq. And I saw the imperial nature of America from that perspective, how his culture was constantly under attack. That the values of Islam were constantly under assault from our movies coming from Hollywood, from the news coming from our perspective, and the control that the country was trying to exercise in that region of the world. Now, I'm not actually going into a political statement right now, so don't interpret this politically and think that whatever you want to think. That's exactly my point. Is that the importance, before you can understand the nature of what you're hearing, is to know the nature of who the listener is and what kinds of things your mind is going to project on the experiences of the senses, because the experiences of the senses are very much like the words, the sounds that I'm talking about. They require interpretation. They require a projected meaning. In and of themselves, they mean nothing. Right? It's not until you identify yourself with a body that a pinch means you're hurting, or someone puts a knife in your arm. If you identify with yourself as body, you're going to feel that on your arm, and you're going to be like, oh my God, there's a knife in my arm, and you pull it out or whatever you're going to do. But if someone stabs the person next to you, you haven't identified with that body, you're not going to even wince. So if you didn't identify with this body, if you were in samadhi, you wouldn't even wince. There's that great story of that sage that was meditating deeply in the woods, and the king comes along with his army, and he's like, oh, there's a guy doing nothing. Let's conscript him and make him carry some of our stuff. Right? And he comes up to the sage, and the sage is just sitting there in meditation, sees the king, and that doesn't give him any attention at all, and doesn't do anything when he's told to do it. And the king says, do you not know who I am? Do you not know that I could thrust this sword through you and take your life at this very moment? And the sage says, do you know who I am? You could thrust that sword through this body this very moment and not break my smile. I'm not this body. You're the one that's identified. You have made yourself powerful and imagined it as such. And so this notion, if you know it's a dream, and you know that you're not that body, that it's just a projection of mind, thrust a sword through it. What's it to me? At worst, I'll wake up. So he's showing us here that it really is not. It's that our interpretation of things may not be right. The big fat wrestler who's eaten lots of meat may not win the wrestle match with the very disciplined and focused man who has fasted for the day. What is the use of printing and advertising? He who teaches men gets his power from God. None but a man of renunciation can teach others. I am the greatest of all fools. Everybody laughs, right? But that's how he sees, because he knows that which speaks, right, is an ego, and that an ego is based on ignorance, built out of memory. And if you identify with that as a particular, you're a fool. You know nothing of the dream you're in. You know nothing of the reality that is, right? And so he's saying there, he says, anyone who teaches from that egoistic perspective, they're going to be small. They're going to wonder if what they said was right, and they're going to care about what everybody thought about it. And they're going to get an opinion of themselves based on what others are thinking and about their effectiveness in convincing others of things. But the man of renunciation, the man who's not attached to his perspective, who doesn't go to the contents of mind, but speaks from the experience of being in the moment, spontaneously informed by his nature of wisdom, he cannot say the wrong thing. He cares not what anybody thinks of what he's saying, because it's not the ego that's speaking. He's being spoken through, as it were. None but a man of renunciation can teach others, because your words won't have that power. If you know a man is a hypocrite, and even if you don't, but the man himself knows he's a hypocrite, he won't be able to speak in a way that you can hear. Your ears will hear it, your intellect will hear it, but your heart will not be moved by that. When he gets done speaking, you won't remember what he said. But that person that speaks through renunciation, you know, not from the egoism, that person you remember their words. That person you can be changed by what they have to say. A devotee, then how is it that the Vedas and the Vedanta and many things besides come out of your mouth? Because he just called himself a fool, right? He's saying, well, how come? How come you're speaking things that the Vedas teach if you're a fool, right? The Vedanta, the cream of the Vedas. The master smiling. During my boyhood, I could understand what the sadhus read at the Laha's house in Karmarpur, right? The town where he grew up. Although I would miss a little here and there, if a pundit speaks to me in Sanskrit, I can follow him, but I cannot speak it myself. To realize God is the one goal of life. While aiming his arrow at the mark, Arjuna said, I see only the eye of the bird and nothing else, not the kings, not the trees, not even the bird itself. Right? He's talking about that necessity of being able to focus. Right? And remember, we were talking earlier about going inside and being able to discern and see the different components. Well, as you get more and more subtle in that practice of discernment, you need to be able to focus, to hold a thought, to watch a point, a very subtle point, and to see and to learn from it. If your mind is wandering all the time and you're constantly forgetting that you're meditating and you're suddenly thinking that you are, doing dishes in the kitchen, wherever your mind takes you, then how can you learn of the subtle aspects of your inner world? How will you ever think that you will find the self, as it were? Of course, if you go looking for the self, then you've never found it because you are that which is looking. So don't do that. All right. So he's saying, well, I learned this from other people and whatnot, and I can't speak it myself, but that's all by the wayside. Who cares? That's all stuff, right? That's all stuff. To realize God, to know the self, this is the goal of life. And he talks about Arjuna. Arjuna had his arrow and he was shooting at going to kill a bird. And so his student was watching him and he said, do you see the bird? What are you looking at when you see? Do you see the bird? No, I do not see the bird. Well, then what are you looking at? And he went through that whole list right there. I don't see the bird. I don't see the wings. I don't see the head. I see only the eye of the bird, that which I'm going for, that which I'm focused on. And this could be used for a metaphor for that inner search. This could be used as a metaphor for, like, if you are a man or woman who wants to find out the nature of reality, you want to be a knower of the divine, then what are you looking at? What are you focusing on through your day? That's why we sing the names of God or we take on a mantra, because that's the name of God. And we're trying to keep our mind focused on that idea of that divinity, that idea of God at all times, right? That's our orientation. That's the compass that keeps us going in the direction. And Thakur says, anything that changes is not real. That which is unchanging alone is real. And that's the riddle. Find that within you that is unchanging and don't take your eyes off it. Don't take your concentration off it. Don't take your sense of self off of it and place it in body or in mind or any of those things. Place it only on that unchanging self within, that self that has always been you and will always be you and is always you, no matter how much pain or happiness you're in. It is that steady sense of being. It is what you are in your real nature. Keep your mind on that. Be aware of awareness always, which is a real trick because thou art that. It's like trying to look at your face, without a mirror, of course, but even then you're looking at a reflection. You're not looking at your face. So let us stop there for tonight.